Arkansas Literary Festival, sponsored by Central Arkansas Library System. And this particular session is co-sponsored with the Arkansas Women's Forum. My name is Akasha Hull. I am a writer and a literary critic and emerita professor of book studies and literature. We have exactly 1 hour, so I'd like for us to jump right into the session, which promises to be a joyful and informative one. If you haven't done so, would you be kind enough to silence your cell phones? That ubiquitous thing that we have to say now everywhere. I'm going to introduce our 3 speakers briefly, and I have asked them after the introduction to describe the work of theirs that we're focusing on today in whatever way they like, and read us a brief passage from it. After that, I have a few questions to ask, and we'll open it up at the end for whatever interaction you all would like to have with the 2 of them by way of questions, comments, or whatever. And immediately after that, I'm going to rush them out to sign their books at the book table, and you can have some work at that point. This is a power-packed panel. It's in the program as acts of empowerment, but just those 3 themselves kick off the powerhouse of the whole thing. I'm going to introduce them in order of their last names, even though they're sitting differently. Joy Fowler, who is in the middle there.
When we sat down, I said, I'm sitting in the middle because they always start either with the right or the left, but nobody ever says, let's start in the middle.
Well, now you get your chance first. Okay, she has written 6 novels and 3 short fiction collections, historical, fantasy, sci-fi, and literary fiction. She's perhaps best known for her least representative work, which is the Jane Austen Book Club, which was made into a very successful comedy of manners film. There is in this room a friend of mine and a huge fan of Ms. Fowler's work, who, when I wrote her and said I would be moderating this session, sent me back a little email talking about her. She says she's best known for genre busting and a bit of gender bending. I love that, plus her daring and imagination and humor. And those are qualities that endear Joy Fowler to many readers. Today we are going to be looking at her latest book, which is We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves, which examines by way of an unforgettable narrative what it means to be human, non-human, and something in between. So that's Fowler. To her right is Janis Kearney, who knew she was and would be a writer when she was 9 years old. This was amazing, since at that point she was picking cotton as a sharecropper's daughter, one of 19 siblings in rural Arkansas. She went on to become a newspaper editor, President Bill Clinton's White House diarist, a publisher, an accomplished memoirist. Her beautiful, for example, memoir called Cotton Field of Dreams. And last year, she released Sundays with TJ, 100 Years of Memories on Warner Road, which features her amazing father, who died in 2013 when he was 107 years old. amazing. Jamaica Kincaid, on the left, was born in the Caribbean island of Antigua and came to the United States when she was 17 years old to work as an au pair girl and nanny in Scarsdale, New York. She is celebrated for her lyrical, semi-autobiographical fiction, which includes At the Bottom of the River, Annie John, Autobiography of My Mother, and now, after 10 years of fictional silence, the book that we're going to be considering today, which is entitled See Now, Then. About her work, Kincaid says, quote, I know what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to write a book and trying to write an original book. Those are the things that concern me. I'm always trying to write an original sentence or trying to figure out why I can't grow blue poppies in Vermont or how to keep a woodchuck out of my garden. So that's Jamaica Kincaid. Will you please join me in welcoming all three of them? We are really, really happy to have you here with us today. And so, just to have you hear them and begin to orient us to their work, they will, why don't we just keep going in that crazy order until we start to mix it up? They will tell you, describe as they wish, the book that we're looking at today and read a short passage from it. So take it away, set it up in whatever way you like.
Right.
Okay.
Why don't I let you sit down for a minute and I'll do that from up there and then try
Do you prefer standing
I
up?
would like to stand up.
Okay,
Yeah.
just go ahead. And I'm just going to kind of try to customize the version. Okay.
Thank you, Akasha, for that beautiful introduction of all of us. It was, as somebody who occasionally introduces people, I know it's not as easy to do as it looks. And that was really nicely done. I'm talking to you today about my newest book, which tragically is not as new as one would hope at this point, but we've quickly passed that. We are all completely beside ourselves, and this is tricky. If you've read the book, I think it's clear that there is something I intended to be as a surprise when it arrives. About a third of the way through the book. You have to get about a third of the way through the book before you know what the book is about. Just adjusted the microphone. Can everybody hear me? So when I turned the book in, my marketing department at my publishing house said, well, this is going to be interesting. How do you expect us to sell a book if we're not allowed to tell people what the book is about? And then reviews began to come out, and they almost all said some variation of, well, I feel very uncomfortable writing this review since I wish to talk about the book, but I'm clearly not supposed to tell you what it's about. And I was, you know, moderately sympathetic to this problem I had created without noticing, I must say, when I wrote the book, none of this crossed my mind. But only moderately sympathetic, until I began to try to go out with the book myself and realized, oh, it's me too. I'm going to have to try to talk you into buying a book, but I do not really wish to tell you what it's about. And every time I got to the point where I thought, you know, enough, the secret is probably out. Anyway, my publisher has now chosen to put my secret on the back cover of the book, so I would get some imploring email from somebody saying, I'm so glad I didn't know when I read it. I hope everybody will not have the book spoiled for them by knowing ahead of time. And then I would think how sad it will be if the person who spoils my book for you is me. So I will just say, although I'm happy, if you wish to reveal the secret in questions you want to ask me, you feel free, because it is on the back cover. But it is based on a psychological experiment that took place in the 1930s. My father was a research psychologist who worked with rats. He studied learning behaviors in rats, and this was an animal behavior study, very, very famous, involving a human child. And that is my book is a very, very fictionalized version of that experiment and of the child who was the center, one of the two centers of that experiment. Because I do not wish to take more than my fair share of time, I'm going to read you a very short section that comes just a little ways in and is about families. The names, the personal names you'll hear are of people in my fictional family. It doesn't really matter that you know who they are to follow this section. In most families, there is a favorite child. Parents deny it, and maybe they truly don't see it, but it's obvious to the children. Unfairness bothers children greatly. It's hard to always come in second. It's also hard to be the favorite. Earned or unearned, the favorite is a burdensome thing to be. I was our mother's favorite. Lowell was our father's. I loved our father as much as our mother, but I loved Lowell best of all. Lowell is her brother. Fern loved our mother best. Lowell loved Fern more than he loved me. When I lay out these facts, they seem essentially benign. Something here for everyone, more than enough to go around. Thank you. That was too brief. Sorry, that's the danger of going first. There's no idea what the rules are.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Janis F. Kearney, and I'm very, very happy to be here. And as Akasha, my good friend, who I agree did an excellent job of introducing us, said, I am a sharecropper's daughter. And it seems that I insinuate that fact into just about everything that I write. It just comes and sticks itself on the pages. But this book, Sundays with TJ, is a book that I began writing very, very early in my life, and it should have been my first book, and there's a long story of why it wasn't, and very shortly I'll tell you the story. I took this book around and I showed it to a bunch of good editors, people that I trusted, and they said, I love this story, but it should be a memoir about your whole life, your whole family. Rather than just your father. So I thought about it a long time and finally decided to make my first book my memoir about my family. And Cotton Field of Dreams, as Akasha mentioned, was my very first memoir. But I knew I had to write my dad's story because I told him when I was very young that I wanted to write his story. My dad was an amazing human being. He was a drifter, a vagabond, and train hopper, and all those things when he was young. But at 29 years old, he settled down with my mother, and they became sharecroppers in southeast Arkansas, and they raised 17 children together. They had 19 children in all, but they raised 17 children together. And when I tell you that I woke up and I went to bed with cotton on my mind, in my hands, smell of cotton, and I know most of you don't think it has a smell, but it does. Cotton was my life. So I attest my love of writing, my love of stories, my love of different cultures from my dad. He went to 10th grade, but he had this sense of learning, this love of learning that he shared with all of us very, very early. And I'm so grateful for that. When I wrote Cotton Field of Dreams, I had a wonderful agent, and she took my book around and she said, people really love your book, but there's another book out right now and your book just can't be published within the next couple of years. And I said, oh God, that's terrible. I can't wait, because my dad was 98 at that time. And I refused to hold on to my book until someone decided it was good enough. So thankfully, my husband and I started a very small publishing company, and we published Cotton Field of Dreams back in 2004. So I think that was the right thing to do. My dad loved the book, and all of my siblings, out of 17 siblings, to tell you that they all loved the book, that's pretty good. So my dad came to live with me 2 years ago. He was 105 at the time. He had lived independently all that time. He would not move in with anybody. My sister and I have a younger sister, Judy, and we would go down and check on him during the week. And on Sundays, which was part of our history as a family, we'd go down and have dinner. And all of the family in Arkansas would come down and we'd have a family dinner. So about 2012, I guess, he decided it's time for me to move in with you. He called me. I could have asked him a million years and he would have said no. But because he called me and said it's time, we were extremely, extremely happy. The same way that he called us and said, I think I need to stop driving, after he ran into the back of his home, and we were trying to figure out how do we take the keys, and nobody wanted to do it. He said, I think I'll stop driving. So it had to be his decision. But my father is an amazing, amazing man, and he left us in December of 2013, and that I'm still grappling with that right now. But what I'm going to read is the introduction, because this is a biography of my dad, but it's also a memoir. And the introduction is kind of telling you why I felt the need to write this book. This is my father's story. I am the self-appointed vessel and orchestrator who commingles his stories and my memories and memories from my siblings to tell his life story. I chose this role some 50 years ago on Varna Road. Thomas James T.J. Kearney was the storyteller, and I the rememberer of his words, even his unspoken meanings. I sat then at the foot of my father's chair as he smoked his Pall Mall cigarettes and set his eyes on days long past and regaled us with his strange and amazing yesterdays. Sometimes he weaved in others' tales, Harry, his mother Cynthia, and certainly his beloved Papa. There were shadows of the many men and women he met during his years of travel. My sister and almost twin, Joanne, listened with a grown-up's jaded ear, taking mental notes of what was and wasn't pure truth. When we were alone, she'd offer her grown-up smile and whisper her thoughts. My younger siblings, Jerome, Jude, Jeffrey, Judy, we were all J's, by the way, all listened like me with unconditional trust and awe. I learned much later that the Kearney surname is an Irish one and wondered if Dad's master forefather stood or sat in the potato fields of Ireland comparing stories late into the silver gray dusk. Did they too spin their yarn with such acuity that their children smelled the sun-ripened berries on the vine, felt the soul-stirring rumbles of the trains beneath their feet? Our favorite storytelling hour was during the summer after our day in the cotton field, the deliciously lazy hours after supper. If we were lucky, the evening would turn into night without Mama noticing. Summer mornings were for the reality of our life on Varna Road. We were cotton sharecroppers, and every moment of those days are etched in my memory. Mama's faint smile as we traipsed one by one into her kitchen for breakfast before our day began, her deft but loving preparation of breakfast as Daddy made his way out the back door and into our backyard, intent on readying our tools for our long day's work. Sometimes breakfast was a quiet affair. Few words were exchanged between us children, and even fewer between our parents. Quite rarely, I would glimpse a furtive smile shared just above our heads, some secret remembers between my parents. The cool summer mornings were forgotten by noon as we stepped on our shadow's head and made our way home, treading the scorching dirt and burning sun. By then, we were fully awake, jostling and racing each other barefoot on the gravelly road. Laughter. Was there any group of children in the whole wide world who loved to laugh as much? Siblings, pointing out each other's weaknesses, playing the word games that kept us entertained. The 5 hours after, as our shadows grew longer and thin, we became quieter, turning away from each other and into our own thoughts, our hours for dreaming, dreaming about the day when there would no longer be cotton fields in our lives. Thank you.
At least you weren't in it.
I'm sorry that would be good. And not the chair. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you for the introduction. Also, thank you for coming out on a Saturday morning, though it is gloomy out, so you are probably better off here. Outside. I am going to read from, that was wonderful. That was really wonderful, yes. This is my way of delaying, actually letting you know that I've written something. I'm going to read from a book called See Now Then. It's a book about a family in New England, a mother and a father. Their names are Mr. and Mrs. Sweet. They have no other names. And the children, a boy and a girl, and they are named Heracles is the boy, and the girl is named Persephone. And they have those attributes of the myth, in the myth. It's springtime just in this chapter, so the girl is, who usually lives in her father's pocket, is out because it's spring. She comes out in spring. They live in a house called, the house is called the Shirley Jackson House because it's New England, and it's not called the Robert Frost House because Robert Frost lived in a house in which his son killed himself, and that family, the Sweets, are not that kind of family. So they wouldn't live in a house where someone killed themselves. What else can I tell you quickly? It's New England, Shirley Jackson, the Sweets. It's so that's a nuclear family, and the marriage is in disarray. The relationship between the mother and father is in disarray. They are probably about to be divorced, but that's not a word that's ever mentioned. Yes, so I'll just read briefly. The mother is a writer, the father writes music, the mother writes. No one likes her, the mother.
No one ever does like a writer.
Exactly. That goes without saying that no one likes her because she's a mother. So, this chapter, briefly I'll read to you. That afternoon, at exactly 4:45, the beautiful Persephone and the young Heracles got off the school bus and found that their mother, the dear Mrs. Sweet, was not waiting to pick them up. They saw the school bus, driven by the madly named Mr. Strange, disappear around the corner below the Bennington Monument. They saw their companions, some wayward boys and girls who lived in villages that were surrounded by evergreens of every kind except for broadleaf, and the evergreens were all sick with the blight of rust. And these companions were very bad, for sometimes the boys among them pummeled the young Heracles almost to death, and the discipline he required to restrain himself from gathering them up all together in his large brown hands and making them as lifeless as his old socks was greater than the force he had used to smite the entire city of Thebes, as it appeared in his handheld Nintendo game. Those boys in any case had names of no distinguished origin, their names being Tad, Ted, Tim, and such. But the bus stop was empty of Mrs. Sweet, and the young Heracles was beside himself with anxiety and sorrow, for he loved his mother so, and only so. And a dark cloud full of a toxic fire emerged from his forehead, and he directed it toward the top of the Bennington Monument, a structure that was dedicated to a battle that led to a defeat and a triumph, and the defeated and the triumphant were now settled into the normal disfigurement of everyday living, and he caused it to fall to the ground, just missing a bus full of citizens from Germany who were taking a tour of New England just then. So beside himself was the young Heracles with anger and grief over Mrs. Sweet not being there to greet him when the school bus arrived at the bus stop, that he sank to the ground, drew his feet up into his chest, his chin resting on his knees, so that he looked like an illustration of a fully developed child intact in his mother's room, an illustration commonly found on the walls of a doctor's office. "Oh, come on," and that was the voice of the beautiful Persephone, his sister, and that is as it should be, for it was spring, and she was released from living in the depths of the pocket of Mr. Sweet's old Brooks Brothers tweed jacket. Not knowing what else to do, she lifted him up with much ease, as if he were some just harvested asparagus, or a pint of strawberries, or a plate of peas, or as if she were removing the hamster that had died overnight in its cage. And she placed him in the right-hand pocket of her own jacket, which was made from polyethylene terephthalate, and the pocket itself was lined with rayon. "Now, now," she said as she stroked the curve of his back, and with her thumb. "Now, now," she said as she stroked the curve of his back with her thumb, her forefingers shielding his head, which rested against his knees. "It is very bad that she's not here to meet us once again when we get off the bus from school. Where the hell could she be? What the hell could she be doing? Oh, she just sits in that room writing about her goddamn mother, as if people had never had a mother who wanted to kill them before they were born in the history of the world. And the stupid father named Mr. Potter, who couldn't even read, and the fucking stupid little island in which she was born, full of stupid people who history would be happy to forget, but she has to keep reminding everybody about that place and those people, and no one cares, and she can't stand it. And where is she? She's in that little room off the kitchen, and from that room she can see the kitchen, and she's making us whatever we all want to eat, and none of us want the same thing. And how she manages to keep writing that shit. Make her stop before I kill her. And it was so much better when she would only knit us stockings that were too big before they were washed, and then were too small after they were washed. And they just gathered dust in the wash basket because she couldn't bear to throw them out after all the time she had spent knitting them. And the hats never kept us warm. They fell into our eyes when we were skiing. And I almost killed myself coming down that black diamond, wearing the stupid hat she had stayed up making for me as a present. And it is the stupid writing, it is the stupid writing, it is the stupid writing that's keeping her from being on time to meet the school bus that was driven by Mr. Strange. Ralph is his name too, and that is not a name with a distinguished lineage, and a man, you know, who should be locked up in a jail in a cell that is buried underground, could come and pick us up and take us to his house and murder us or violate us sexually, and we would never be seen again or heard again, not even be mentioned in the nightly news. Vanish from the face of the earth like a species from a geological era that isn't even yet detected. What is she doing? What is she doing? What the hell is she doing? She's sitting there in that room at the big desk that Donald made for her, and she's thinking of a sentence and the way to end it. My mother would kill me if she got the chance, and I would kill my mother if I had the courage, and as if such a thing were possible. She lives in that world of the room with the desk and the kitchen just beyond, and she leaves us here all alone for a man to murder us, for tourists from Germany to stare at us, for all the other children and their mothers to see that she doesn't love us. She only loves the world that she carries around in her head, a torrent of lies, all in her head. We are nothing to her, nothing, nothing, only those words in her head. And now look, the night is coming. The ink black night is going to swallow us up, and we will never be found, for we will be lost in the night itself, as if it were the ink black sea.
You just listen to them read. Okay. Because of what they read, what I'd like to do is ask each one of you a question. There's so many ways to do this, but I think I'd like to do that. And so, Karen, I was so happy that you had the job of trying to describe your book rather than me, okay? But I want to try to give people more of a sense of it. And so I think if I ask you to maybe weave together certain things. Ursula K. Le Guin said that Joy Fowler, in this particular book, has written the book she's always had it in her to write, which implies that there is something you've been about your whole life that this, as a writer, that this is kind of getting a purpose into. And so if you could kind of speak to that, what did she mean? That book is what you had in you to write. And the other little thing, if you could weave it in there, is you yourself said, the more upset I am about certain things, the funnier I get, and that you really want to write about the things that distress you, but in an enjoyable way. So I'm getting at the purpose of the book and what you want us to get from it and how it relates to you.
All right, thank you. I will just start by saying that, you know, that it would be nice if I had a new book coming out, and I don't. And this is one of the issues, I think. When one has written the book that one was born to write, what then does one write next? I do think this book brings together a lot of, while being not 1 inch autobiographical, it brings together a lot of my own childhood, a lot of my own obsessions and passions. My father, as I said, was a research psychologist. He worked with rats. I spent many, many, many hours of my childhood in the rat lab, which I realize every time I say to somebody or I comment to someone about the nostalgic hit we get off the smell of rat cages, I am reminded that everybody else did not spend their childhood in the rat lab. And I think that when I was 6 years old, certainly no later than 6, I began to argue with my father over the question of whether animals could think or not. And this has been, this argument lasted up until his death, where by making that one unfortunate move, he lost, because now I can argue unimpeded my point of view. Something I am sadly aware my children will also do to me, should everything unfold as it should. So this book is about that. It's about that long-standing argument. It is in many ways my sort of final triumphant word on the subject. I do think one of the things that I did when I was writing the book was take a class at UC Santa Cruz, where I live, on animal theory, and the whole field of animal cognition is moving incredibly quickly. My father was a scientist before everything else, so I do think that in light of what we now know and what we now see, he would eventually have agreed that I had been right ever since I was 6 years old, all along. Although in point of fact, that does not sound very much like my father. As to the second thing, interestingly, I went to a Janis F concert just a couple of nights ago, and she said something, she lives in Nashville, and she said something about the South, which was, the angrier we get, the bigger our smile becomes, which I thought was interestingly like what I had said. The angrier I get, the funnier I become. And the whole issue of how much I should ask a reader to suffer in a fictional world that I am creating is one that I think about a lot. And I think about it as a reader too. How much am I willing to read a book that makes me feel bad about the human race and about our prospects, because I feel bad enough as it is in the real world. I don't know that I need to feel that way in people's imagined worlds as well. But I want to write about the things that matter to me, and they are upsetting things frequently. So my strategy is to try to be funny. And I hope that the book, which has some very upsetting material in it also. I mean, there were times when I was laughing so hard I could hardly type, so I'm hoping that you feel the same.
And that seems contradictory, but it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. Really, it's absolutely true. Thank you. Janis? What you're writing is, and this has a lot to do with what you read too, what you're writing is creative nonfiction, which is an interesting genre because it limits you to facts and reality, but on the other hand, it frees you up in terms of style. Like when she was reading that passage, I'm sure you got the lyricism, the poeticism, and all of that in what you're choosing. So I'm wondering what it is, as somebody who wants to do autobiography, memoir, what draws you to that, and talk a little bit about your creative writing process.
Okay. I love stories. That's like the very first thing. I fell in love with stories, and whenever I write, whatever I write, I am writing it from the perspective of I'm sharing a story with the reader. So that ends up being creative nonfiction, I suppose, because I do not like dry autobiography or biography. I like to tell something a little deeper, a little more in-depth about whoever I'm writing about, and I will do the kind of research that I need to do to find something that nobody else knows about this person or this time in our lives, to share it. So a lot of times people will come back to me and say, I love the story about your father, but I learned so much more about something else that I didn't know about Southeast Arkansas, or about the period that my father was born. So I think my storytelling, my love of storytelling kind of leads me to the creative nonfiction genre. I want to do something a little bit more than just tell the straight story. I want to tell something more than that. My creative process, I have lots of stories, as I'm sure my panelists will agree, that most authors have more than one story in them. They choose what they're going to put out and publish and share with the world. But when I get done with one book, I already know that I have several that I have to choose from. So we all do the dog and pony part. After you write a book, you go out and talk about the book. You kind of share the book. But the most important part and the most enjoyable part for me is when I come back and I sit at my desk and I begin to create another story, because that's who I am and that's what I love. I think most writers are introverts, and if I could just sit in my office all day and write, I would be happy. But we have to live too, so we have to do other things. I'm a person, a lot of people ask, well, when do you write? How long do you write? I write very early because I get up early in the morning, and that is my time when my brain is most active. Come 4 or 5, my brain is pretty much going to sleep. So I get most of my writing done very early in the day, and I may work on something at night, but I know that I can't really put anything down that I'm going to leave as is that next day. I do like research. I love research, and I'm usually writing something that I can do some research and add to the story. So research is usually the part that happens before I actually sit down and start writing my book. Okay?
Yes, terrific. Thank you. Jamaica, the passage that you read reminded me of something you had said in an interview. You said various things about what See Now Then is about, but in one of them you said that it was about a mother's need for something beside her children. And so that's one way of talking about what that book is about. The other thing I have noticed is that critics seem to either love See Now Then or dismiss it. And whether or not they do one or the other depends on whether they are viewing the book as a vengeful text about the dissolution of your own marriage, or whether they are viewing it as an exploration of how time operates in our minds and in our psyches and in our life. Now that's an either-or pitfall, which I think is a pitfall, and we could think about it in terms of both and. But I'm putting these two things together to see if I can get you to talk as briefly as you can about your responses to that.
My responses to the criticism.
What the book is, what it is you're getting at in the book, and how to deal with that critic thing of viewing it.
Primarily for me, the book was about time. I have a photograph of myself at 2 years of age, and I know I have a crease in my forehead, and that was when it began. It's difficult to see, but it's very prominent to me, because the little dividing line here. It's not with age. I've had it since I was 2. And it began when I was 2, this anxiety, which is so much a part of me, I don't even call it. It's like breathing. And it was because my mother, I was standing on a chair having my picture taken. I'll try to be quick. And my mother was a little bit away, and I wasn't sure if the gap between us, me on the chair and she a little bit away, 3-4 feet away, would ever be bridged again, if I would ever touch her again. And I was having, so looking at that picture, I began to think, well, what happened to that person, you know, and you grow up, and they say your cells change every 7 years and so on. So, but I was wondering, where is she? Where can I find her? Only memory. And I began to think about time and how my own life raveled and unraveled and re-raveled itself again, all of those things, and latching onto it, certain events in my life. Critics, some of them, especially one particular person who I think were friends. An actual campaign against the book was orchestrated by my ex-husband's brother and his girlfriend. You can look them up and send them poison letters. An actual campaign was orchestrated against the book, including a jab at it, taken at it at me and my children by a woman I really I sometimes call her a windbag. A woman named Francine Prose took a stab at it, and I think in some ways people thought, that probably my race and gender did play into the criticism of it, because I think someone who looks like me in both those ways is supposed to write a certain kind of book, about the racial and gender transgressions, and instead I wrote a book in which the wife plays a prominent role, but the race thing doesn't. The race thing is so boring, and I only wish white people would become nicer.
I'm trying.
Yes, I know. I know, and I'm so grateful. Speed it up. But the race thing doesn't so interest me. It was, I think, primarily the hostility to it stems. It's a difficult book to read. It's not. I'm never concerned with the reader until later when they don't buy my book. Maybe I should have told it in a story. But I never think about them really. It's a book that someone who looks like me, I'm not supposed to be concerned with writing a certain way. I have to have the melodrama. It would serve me better for critics if I had the melodrama of, the abused black woman. And all of us are abused, and she actually is abused, the woman in it, but she isn't black. She's just a mother, which is hard enough.
That shed some light. We have 15 minutes left, and the time is yours. Okay, here.
This is for Ms. Fowler. You addressed the favorite child in the portion you read, but you also mentioned that you have children. Do you have a favorite child, and do their siblings recognize that you have a favorite child?
I have 2 children. I would say my favorite child is a rotating position, kind of on a day-to-day basis. But for years, both of my children signed every Mother's Day card to meet the good child. So either my second or my third book, I think it's my third book, it was dedicated to the good child. I thought that will cover all my bases.
I have 3 daughters, and when they call, they all say, "This is your number 1 daughter."
Yes, ma'am, I grew up on a cotton or farm, and we farmed cotton when I was a kid. I remember picking cotton. I remember how prickly it was. My question could be for you, and it could be other panelists too. I just completed a book that I've written myself that's a fiction book that is partly autobiographical. And I'm wondering, how hard is it, from your experience, to get something published, but also to get the publicity about your message out?
Me? I'm going to ask Janis to answer.
Yeah, Janice would be great. Anybody else? Yeah.
It's a lot of work. And a lot of people say, oh, I've got this book and I want to publish. It's a lot of work. And I ask people to think carefully about whether you are willing to do the work, because it's much easier if you go through the process of finding a publisher to publish your work. I wasn't willing to wait for that. It is hard work. It is, first of all, you have to know that you're a writer and you have a story that people are interested in, and a story that you're passionate enough about to write. The hard part was actually getting like a team of people, like an editor and a graphic designer and a book designer and all of that. You have to know what all you really need before you can actually do your own publishing. And I found it out. It was a learning process for me. But we did. Over 10 years, we've gotten a little better. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
It was a little wine in it.
Okay. So, yeah, that's what I'd say. I encourage anyone that wants to do it, and you have a story and you've already done your book and you are ready to go forward on it, to do some research. Possibly there's lots of books out on it. Talk to people who have done it. There's lots of people who have done independent and self-publishing. So just talk to as many people as possible. And I'm happy to give you my card so that you can call me.
Excellent.
Question for everyone. Starting with you, Jan. You talked about writing stories. Are your stories geared for empowering people to do things to motivate others?
I'm going to ask you to turn around and talk louder so I don't have to repeat it.
I just don't want to be loud.
Don't be loud, be loud. Turn around and be loud. Okay.
My question is geared towards you is, you talk about writing stories. Is it geared toward empowering people to do things to motivate others?
I could say yes to both of those, but I think most writers will tell you they write because they love writing and they have to write. I have to get my stories out. My hope and prayer is that my stories will touch someone and they will be empowered by them. I think that's a secondary reason that I write, and I love it when someone says, your story helped change my life in some way. But I have to tell you that the sole reason, the initial reason is because I have to write and I have to get my stories out.
Karen?
Yeah, I usually, when I'm writing, am focused on the story and on, trying to tell it in a clear and hopefully entertaining way. But, and I tend to write about things on which I myself have confusions. So, it's a way of thinking through certain issues through a narrative. But I do, particularly with this last book, I do want it to have an impact. I want people, mainly the impact I want is I want people to think more. I want to bring some things that I think are invisible into the light. Because I think if people think about them and people see about them, and most of this involves our relationship with animals and things like the factory farms. I think that certain things can occur because nobody sees them, and that my hope is if people see them, they will stop occurring.
Jamaica?
Do I hope to affect people?
Empower
People? No. I usually am not thinking about other people. It turns out that people younger than I am, from the place I come from, sees me as an example of something they can do, and but I didn't set out to do that, and that's very gratifying. I think what you say is really wonderful. I would be afraid of empowering anyone, or hoping to. First of all, if I wrote to empower people and they didn't become empowered, I would be so upset. And then if I wrote to empower people and they became empowered, I'd want to lead them. And I'm sure I would just be a horror show. So I try not to think of.
I will say that one of my early experiences as a writer, I had only published 3 stories, so this was remarkable. I went to a convention, science fiction convention, and a woman looked at my name tag and said, "Oh, you're Karen Joy Fowler. Your stories have changed my life." And I think that, such a lovely story until I add the detail that she was dressed as a giant cat. Tried to tell myself, calm down, calm down. You have no idea what she was dressing like before she read your story. Okay. We
time for one question, and I'd like to take it from a woman, just in the interest of some gender variety and diversity here.
Come on.
We're empowering you. Come on.
Miss Kincaid, I started reading you in '94 when my AP English teacher gave us a list of authors to choose from and told us whoever we were, pick someone from a different culture. And so my first impression of you were your books, like Lucy and Annie John. But when I was hearing Persephone's talk, it's almost like you wonder, it almost sounded like not a criticism, but okay, you processed the island madness enough, get on to something else. Do you feel like your writing is always a processing of the same experiences in different ways, in different lenses, or?
Oh, that's an interesting question, the same experiences. I do really believe, not just think, that something happens to you before you are 7, or just around when you're 7, certainly no later than the rest of your life you arrange to have that event recur. So it's quite possible that I just have the one thing that I look at from different angles. I did come to feel at a certain point that I had not only married my mother, but recreated all the drama of my childhood in many ways in a small town in New England. So it's quite possible that you're detecting something quite real. And now that you've brought it to my attention, I would promptly forget it.